Thanks for standing by and welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. Our next presentation today is from Biogene Technology with the ASX code BGT, and we're joined by the CEO and Managing Director, Tim Grogan. Biogene is developing novel bioinsecticides to address the global challenges of insecticide resistance and toxicity. Its unique products are based on a naturally occurring class of compounds proven to overcome resistance to control pests with minimal impact on human health and the environment. As a reminder to those in the audience, if you have a question that you'd like to put forward, please submit that using the Q&A panel within Zoom, and we'll get to those at the end. But for now, I will hand it over to Tim for the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt, and thanks for the opportunity to introduce Biogene to a new audience, but also to provide an update on some of our recent developments and achievements. And by way of background, the connection between the development of insecticides and healthcare might not immediately resonate with people, but I'll show you very shortly why that connection is actually very important. And in this presentation, what I want to do is cover some of the context around the development and the problems we're seeking to solve with our products in development, how we're going about that, the nature of those compounds, our commercial partnerships and business model, and our forward announcement outlook. So without further ado, in summary, what Biogene is doing for those of you who are not familiar is fundamentally we're developing two new insecticidally active compounds that are derived from nature, from a particular type of eucalypt, and they have developed through nature to protect the eucalypt trees from insect attack. And we've been able to identify a pretty special opportunity to commercialise these two compounds into a very significantly changing world environment where insect resistance and regulatory pressures and concerns about safety are leading to some fundamental changes in the ag chem and mosquito control space. So they're large target markets, and we've identified 5 unique segments that together sum to $31 billion, which is a tremendously big number, but really just indicates we have a really, really sizable commercial opportunity ahead of us. At the same time, being a small listed company, we're very, very focused on the development of the actives through the regulatory process, and the compounds we have in development and the patents of use have stood up to very significant rigour, and we're on a mission to achieve regulatory filing late this year or very early next year. And we've entered into a number of validating commercial partnerships that I'll speak to in a moment. So in terms of the significant global challenges and the connection, firstly, with healthcare, as some of you will be well aware, vector-borne diseases through mosquitoes such as dengue and malaria result in very significant death and illness worldwide. In fact, the mosquito is actually the most dangerous animal that has ever lived. Although it's small, it certainly leads to very, very poor health outcomes. Singapore had a terrible outbreak of dengue in 2024, and as you're probably well aware, malaria is a major challenge in principally rural Africa. But would you believe there's malaria now in Florida? So this is a growing world problem, where the resistance and the ineffectiveness of current compounds represents a big opportunity for us. And on the flip side, beyond the health control and malaria dengue area, more broadly, crop production and protection using insecticides is an area where there's significant commercial pressures because current compounds are losing their effectiveness through resistance. They're also not being renewed through the regulators due to concerns about safety. And this is in the context of less and less arable land and the need to produce food to feed a growing world population. And when we talk about 20 to 40% global food production loss through insect attack, depending on the crop, that represents a very, very substantial opportunity to make a difference. Just briefly, by way of background, some of these names may or may not be familiar to you, but the world is currently reliant on a number of classes of synthetic chemistry insecticides, and these, it turns out, have evolved since the late 50s and 60s. And this slide represents 4 of the major categories, and these classes each represent a particular type of what's called mode of action. So the way they kill an insect and interact with an insect is different. Many of these originated or were inspired, their structures were inspired by natural compounds, and they were then the subject of modification by synthetic organic chemists to chase efficacy, to make them more effective. And one of the issues that's arisen through experience and data is that those modifications, unfortunately, can lead to pretty significant safety concerns in terms of toxicity to animals, effect on beneficial insects such as bees, and also their environmental fate and their ability to remain active in the environment, in soil and water, and affect aquatic life. But the major challenge that's arisen is that these compounds lose their effectiveness eventually. Through selection pressure, what's happened is that insects adapt through that pressure. The constant application of the same products over the same species results in these insects adapting, and effectively the insecticides lose their efficacy. It's a well-documented phenomenon, and it's very, very similar to the microbial resistance that built up in hospitals. This issue of resistance perhaps has a lower profile, but as particularly farmers and public health authorities lose the ability to fight infection and fight attack by insects, there's been a tremendous realization that we need new modes of action. And the way to break resistance is to use these products in a way that has sustainable integrated pest management practices. So we fit within a really significant changing context where there are significant pressures on the commercial partners. So the global challenges fundamentally come down to a diminishing pool of current products available to farmers through the fact that they lose effectiveness, or they're not renewed or taken off the market. And even in Europe, Aldi has banned 8 approved products from its supply chain. If you're a canola grower in Australia and your crop is infested with red-legged earth mite, and you use the standard product in Australia to combat that insect, you're no longer able to export your canola into Europe. So there are major trade challenges in addition to the fact that some of these compounds are no longer available to growers, and they need new solutions to continue to produce the crops and achieve yields so that they can have a livelihood. So our approach is to develop 2 active compounds derived from nature with a novel mode of action, and it's this derived from nature that is really the significant change. I was working with Monsanto back in the late 90s, responsible for growth in new technology, and I couldn't have contemplated back then that the ag chem industry would effectively now no longer be able to achieve new product launches based on synthetic chemistry. The pressure from regulators, the data requirements, the pressure from consumers and supply chains and such that process effectively stopped in many territories. And what Biogen is experiencing is significant interest from commercial partners in looking at alternatives, and particularly those derived from nature. So just to introduce the 2 actives that we have in development. So Q-side is an oil extracted through steam distillation, present from a type of eucalypt called Gympie mesmate. This is grown up in coastal Queensland and in the Atherton tableland. And Biogen has been able to identify through some work that was done at the University of Western Sydney that it turns out that a particular subtype produces very high quantities of the active called tasmanone. And now we've completed the 12th harvest, and now actually recently the 13th, just very recently. And we've been able to work out a system to optimize production of tasmanone oil through around about every 6 months, harvesting using the equivalent equipment you can see there in the top right, and extracting the oil, which is the active material. In addition, flavicide is based on an active compound called flavocone that is produced in very small quantities within the Gympie mesmate, but those quantities make it not possible to extract it through steam distillation. But what we've been able to do is work out how to manufacture it synthetically, but in a way that the compound is absolutely identical to the natural flavocone. And that means that flavicide is available to us, excuse me, in unlimited quantities for commercialization. The insect control market, as I said, is very, very significant in size. And around about half of it is involved with crop protection and grain storage, both areas that we're active in. Public health and mosquito control at around about 13–15%. And that's an area of subject to significant public funding, and actually represents an area that we've entered into several commercial partnerships, and it's the first area we anticipate obtaining approval for flavicides use in Australia. In addition, we have a partnership in consumer garden, home and garden applications, and we also have an opportunity in animal care. We're not actively working in that area just simply for focus reasons, but we are experiencing actually surprising interest in solving some of the challenges in that area. So what I'd like to focus on now is that each of these verticals represents very sizable opportunities, and perhaps in contrast to perhaps a biotechnology company in the human health space, it's unusual, in my experience, for a company like BioGene developing these actives to have the potential to commercialize these in quite different areas as a result of the insect pressure and dynamics. So from a business model perspective, we are and will continue to enter into licensing commercial partnerships with companies in each of these verticals, which, as you'd appreciate, represents the opportunity for multiple partnerships and diverse areas for the licensing terms. As I said, we're focusing first on the mosquito control area. And when you develop compounds for each of these applications, it's fundamentally a two-step process where you develop and have approval for the active ingredient. It's a regulatory process, and much like biotech, but significantly shorter and cheaper. And we don't, unfortunately, have the standard nomenclature of phase 1, 2, and 3, but I'll demystify that process for you in a moment. And secondly, we develop formulations with our partners to make the use of the active suitable for the environment in which it will be used. So we went through a process relatively recently to focus the opportunities and match our activities and partnerships with, if you like, the opportunities that represent the most commercial bang for our investors. And flavicide, as it turns out, has an opportunity in grain storage and across a number of flying and crawling insect applications. We're very focused at the moment, for example, on a residual outdoor mosquito control product. And we've entered into partnerships with Clark Mosquito in the US and Cayman Islands. So they are the largest mosquito control company in the US. And we've also recently announced that we're working with NWR, which was previously Bayer's professional pest management group that were rolled out in a private equity transaction. And we're also working with NWR outside the US on mosquito control opportunities. At the same time, we have the opportunity with Evergreen to deal with consumer products, and that relates to both home and garden and home insect control. And on the QSide side, we've entered into an innovative commercial partnership with Stockton STK BioAg, which is an Israeli company, and they've taken on the regulatory development of QSide in, once again, quite an interesting commercial arrangement. At a high level, the regulatory development process for insecticidal actives is relatively straightforward compared to the phase 1, 2, and 3 that many of you will be used to in the human health area. But fundamentally, it involves, first of all, undertaking the assessment of the manufacturability, chemistry, stability, and at the same time, safety in animal studies. The regulator at that point doesn't assess efficacy. That's something effectively that our partners assess. And what we do with flavicide and the focus for Biogen is that we take on and are responsible for the progression of the studies and the regulatory development. And based on this slide, what you'll see is that we're currently involved in the generation of the flavicide active ingredient data to be combined into our regulatory dossier for submission end of this year, early next year, depending on the finalisation of those studies. And that's followed by a window of what's at the moment a 15-month review and approval period by the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, or APVMA, the Australian regulator. The important thing is all of that data is being generated to OECD standards, and we can then, on the back of our submission in Australia, utilise that in other territories, the EPA, Brazil, and Europe. And at the same time, our partners are involved in the assessment of the active in different formulations. And they, under our business model, do a lot of the formulation work. They have that in-house capability, and they take on the responsibility for preparing and filing the dossier associated with the formulated product. And as you'll see from the diagram, that is a process that happens at the same time, and the regulatory approval occurs after we achieve approval of the active compound. It's important perhaps to acknowledge that compared to a biotech company, this process is far shorter, far cheaper, and we're not exposed to the human condition in the sense of human clinical studies. So it's perhaps a simplified model than many of you will be used to. Just briefly touching on an interesting phenomenon we've observed that has relevance to the global ag chem industry. And fundamentally, it turns out that we have data that shows that when you combine our unique mode of action through Q-side or flavicide with some of the existing compounds with other modes of action, you achieve a synergistic effect. So that's more than a 1+1 effect. And that has a lot of significance in terms of the objective of patent life extension on the one hand, but also the ability to enhance the removal of synthetic compounds from the environment. And we pursue Q-side and flavicide as both standalone and combination or synergistic opportunities. And this slide just summarises for you the relationships we have in place. The exciting thing about Biogen from my perspective is that for a company of our size and stage, we've actually entered into a significant number of commercial partnerships already. And that's a great testament to the work that's been done over the years, but it also means that these companies are significantly investing in the further development of Q-side and flavicide to take to the market. And they're also partners to undertake the commercialisation, distribution and sales in market. During 2024, we also announced this collaboration with NView, which we're very pleased to put into the public domain, but we're also involved with a number of high-profile institutions. So Purdue University are working with us on tick-borne diseases in the US through a CDC-funded program. GRDC have been a very big supporter of us around grain storage, and CSIRO have helped us enormously with the elucidation of the flavicide synthetic pathway. And just recently, in fact, end of January, we announced that we were the recipient of 2 US Department of Defense grants, which is, we believe, the first time that this has happened for this area. It's quite special, not only to receive 1, but 2 in the single round. And perhaps the best way to describe this is that the US Department of Defense has come to us for the development of a new weapon against mosquitoes and bed bugs. And that's a really exciting opportunity for us because on the left, it involves the development of flavicide and its combination with a passive emanator device that would be worn, in this case, by the uniformed soldiers, but similarly has application in the civilian market to passively emanate the active and, if you like, provide a halo to repel the mosquitoes from biting the soldier in this case. In addition, it turns out that bed bugs are a major problem in not only the US Army, but many other armed services around the world. And I know I've experienced the terror of bed bugs visiting Sydney many years ago. And I know that in London, New York, and Paris at the moment, they have significant outbreaks, and it's a real headache and a very significant commercial opportunity for us. So we were delighted to announce this, and we're working with some world-leading collaborators on those opportunities. And this slide just touches on some of the news flow and significant achievements we've had in terms of interaction with the regulators to clarify the development pathway for flavicide and helping us with the finalisation of the study plans for flavicide to submit in our dossier at the end of the year or early next year. The InView collaboration that I've spoken about, and then most significantly, we've achieved pilot scale production with Rallis, part of the Tata Chemical Group in India, for the production of flavicide. It's important to note that unlike a biotech company who may license across and hand their active across for scale up and manufacture to their licensee, we involve the supply of the active. So we maintain that IP and are able to collect a margin on the supply of active under our commercial arrangements, in addition to upfront milestone and royalties on net sales. So it's important perhaps to, compare Biogen with a biotech, but there are significant and I think really some quite exciting commercial differences in terms of payoff. So our strategic priorities, as for all of the companies no doubt presenting today, speed to milestones and achieving those key regulatory outcomes. In this case, our core activity involves the development of flavicide, finalisation of the study dossier, submission to APVMA, so that we then have approval as soon as possible and then can supply the active to our commercial partners, and obviously will then be able to generate quite significant revenue. Perhaps important to note that Biogen's business model such that we have a very lean operation, so the vast majority of those royalties and the return on the supply of the active will be available as dividends for shareholders. Efficient use of capital, of course, we leverage up shareholders' funds at every opportunity. The US DoD grants, the R&D rebates are all significant contributors. Focused product development is a key for what we do. We have to be focused. We have more opportunity than we can fund and develop, and we've picked the eyes out of the core ones that we think are worth going after at this point in time. And we've achieved substantial commercial validation through our partnerships already. We've got a really strong team on our board, a lot of commercial experience, as you can see there on the slide. Alex Ding is a former M&A lawyer and is providing a lot of very valuable oversight, in addition to Andrew with his experience at Syngenta and Chris Ramsey also through the AgChem industry, and Peter May and I both on the executive team and on the board. So a small team, and we enter into a large number of external partnerships to achieve the outcomes for our shareholders. I've included a couple of slides here to provide a little bit of context around the external environment, particularly around the biological space that the big companies are showing significant interest in. They're under pressure to demonstrate that they're serious about the development of new, safer products, and the biological space and those derived from nature represent a major new category opportunity for them. And in addition to commercial licensing, there have been a number of M&A transactions that also provide you hopefully with a little bit of context around the environment that we operate in. There are very, very few other new compounds being developed like flavicide and Q-side, and perhaps by comparison, as a reference point, there's a company based in the UK called Citrifine International, and they have an insect repellent called citriodiol. That's effectively a natural oil, and they represent another marker if you'd like to look those up. So in terms of the forward-looking news flow, we can really break it down into the development of our products, which is really key. We can have more commercial partnerships and broader commercial partnerships, and we'll certainly be continuing to make great advancements there. But fundamentally, it's all about the regulatory approval of the active so that sales can then commence in the very near future. And of course, at every opportunity, leveraging up funding opportunities against other external sources is super important. So just to finalise and to recap, 2 new naturally derived insecticidal compounds with major market opportunity, great external third-party validation at a technical and commercial level, a really high-margin business model that we're very pleased with, in particular in terms of capturing the margin on the active and net sales royalties, and an experienced management team and board. Thanks very much, Matt.
Thanks for that, Tim. We've just got about 3-ish minutes for questions, so I'll just jump into those. So, Tim, what is the estimated cost to develop these technologies to the point of commercialisation in your sort of estimate?
That's so you can approach the answer very simplistically at 2 levels. At an industry level, you see average numbers of 300 to 500 million per active when you amortize all of the industry activity. In the case of Biogen, to date, the company's raised around about $18 million, and here we are on the cusp of filing. So all I can say is that's a very, very significant difference, and we've got a lot of efficiency built into that. I'd much rather be us than the big guys doing it.
And do you need to pursue separate regulatory pathways for each major market or geography?
Effectively, the regulators provide that key to access the market, the approval to then supply and sell and have the product used in the environment. But the good news is that although they are separate, they rely on fundamentally the same sort of data. Slight variations by territory as to what they might need, but certainly in our case, all of the data we submit through to the APVMA is then to the standard required for the US EPA and Europe and other major markets. Yeah.
And your understanding, what's the competitive landscape like in terms of other novel insecticides that you might consider comparable that are in development?
Yeah, so I keep a close watch on 10 or 11 of those sort of compounds. And what's really interesting is that they typically have low levels of efficacy or very narrow spectrum. The problem for a number of them is that the level of efficacy is such that they have a hard time displacing the current synthetic compounds that are often still available, even though there are resistance compounds. So I guess at a high level, what I'd say is, the flavicide Q-side story is based around a full regulatory package with competitive cost of goods and level of efficacy to compete directly with the current compounds. And many of the others appear to have quite narrow relevance or doubtful commercial opportunity.
And just one last one. Is there any case studies or examples you can point to of other companies who've, in a similar position to you, have realised value off the back of commercialising a novel insecticide technology like this?
Look, I think the best examples to point to would be the couple that I've listed there in the slide on the M&A side. The category of biological and nature-derived compounds is still relatively new. They have a few that have been approved, and in the US, they are rapidly catching up to areas in the rest of the world due to the concerns around forever chemicals, PFAS in groundwater. So at the end of the day, the M&A transactions and the commercial licensing transactions provide a pretty good summary of those that have perhaps reaped, if you like, from an investor sense, a return on their investment.
All right, well, we're right on time there, Tim. So thanks for your presentation today and taking those questions. And if anyone in the audience has any further questions, feel free to get in contact. Our details are on the ASX announcements. But thanks again, Tim.
Right. Thanks, Matt.
And 10 minutes from now, we've got our final presentation for the conference, which is from Neurotech International. So hopefully some of you will join us then. And thanks again.